Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about the new movie Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This movie is directed by James Mangold, whose most notable films are Logan, Ford vs. Ferrari, and 3:10 to Yuma. I'm a big fan of the Indiana Jones franchise, and with this potentially being his last film, I had to go check it out. The synopsis is as follows. Daredevil archaeologist Indiana Jones races against time to retrieve a legendary dial that can change the course of history. Accompanied by his goddaughter, he soon finds himself squaring off against Jürgen Voller, a former Nazi who works for NASA. So without further ado, let's get into the 6 things that make a movie great. 1. The plot. This movie opens with a flashback of Indiana Jones attempting to steal an artifact from the Nazis, but accidentally finding a different one than he was looking for. The one he did find was half of a dial made by Archimedes that supposedly allows the user to go back in time. Flash forward, Dr. Jones is retiring from the university he's worked at, when all of a sudden his goddaughter Helena Shaw shows up and starts asking questions about that time. She ends up coming away with his half of the dial, and then they're swept up into this adventure where they have Nazis pursuing them and pursuing the other piece of the dial so they can bring it together, change history, and rule the world. And in and of itself, that plot sounds pretty interesting, pretty adventurous, but the way it played out wasn't the best. I know some of the Indiana Jones movies are like this, but this one was probably the most, we have to go get this thing to then go get this thing to see this person to get this thing, that I felt any of them have been. And what ultimately could have been a simple plot just seemed really convoluted. Literally in the middle of a fast-paced action sequence, they incorporate this weird subplot, sub-story having to do with Helena and someone she's conned, and it's just really unnecessary and confusing. And that's the ultimate takeaway that I have from this plot, is that the plot isn't the problem. The way this story was told just made everything feel like it had less value than it could have, and that was really disappointing. The best scene in this movie is the final scene, so while I'm happy it ended on a good note, for me, plot gets a 50-50. 2 is family friendliness. Indiana Jones' Dial of Destiny is rated PG-13. There's some mild profanity in this movie, but there is almost constant action and violence throughout the whole movie. They don't go overboard with it, and there's not a ton of blood or gore, so use your discretion, but for me, family friendliness gets a 50-50. 3 is acting and script. There are only 3 acting performances to really talk about in this movie. 1 is Harrison Ford. He does a really great job, and he's fun to watch on screen. Phoebe Waller-Bridge plays Helena Shaw, Indiana Jones' goddaughter, and while her acting performance was okay, the script of this movie was so messy that it kind of made it look worse than it was. Mads Mikkelsen plays the main antagonist, and he is a darn good antagonist, but not in this movie. It just seemed like his moments were kind of wasted when they could have been more than they were. And pretty much all the other characters besides those 3 are empty and useless. And again, I think that has to do in large part to this script. The script of this movie is a mess. There are so many different moments in this movie that are very fast-paced and have a bunch of fast-paced dialogue, and even if you're able to catch all of it, it just seems pretty empty and inconsequential. There were quite a few moments that some serious things were happening, but the script seemed to not really know how to handle them, and as a result, it really shallowed out some of these moments that could have had some real depth. So for me, acting and script get a 50-50. 4 is character development. There were a couple brief and fleeting moments in this film where Indiana Jones had some character development, but I got a little frustrated because not only were those moments infrequent, but then instead of focusing on those and letting it just kind of savor with the audience, they would then jump into another scene having to do with more fast-paced action or adventure. And honestly, I think it would have done this movie good to focus on a couple of those moments at least a little bit longer. Then there's the matter of Helena Shaw. Her character would be likable enough if it didn't seem like she was overshadowing Indiana Jones. And that was one of my biggest issues with this movie. She had to finish the sentences first. She had to outsmart Indiana Jones a couple times. She had to always be the one to solve the problems, while Indy was kind of just stuck in some of these situations that it seemed like she was the only one capable of getting them out of. And for me, I guess there's a fine line between passing on the mantle and having some friendly competition to it kind of seeming like Indiana Jones is basically incompetent and she's the one running the show. But it felt more like that than the former, which is unfortunate, but it also led to there not being much on-screen chemistry between Jones and Shaw, which really could have benefited this movie, because you don't really feel much about their relationship in general. And because of the busy plot and action focus this movie had, Helena's character in and of itself didn't have much depth, and her arc by the end of the movie kind of falls flat on on its face. So for me, character development gets a thumbs down. 5 is visuals and CGI. Like I mentioned before, there is a very high focus on fast-paced, intense action sequences in this movie. It's so fast-paced and just doused with pretty bad CGI. Are they entertaining? Yes, but they're not as easy to follow along with as they were in the older movies. And both the age reduction CGI and the CGI they use just in the background and in the middle of these action sequences is really not that good, and it does pull you out of the movie at times. So for me, visuals and CGI get a 50-50. And 6 is rewatchability. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is 2 hours and 22 minutes long. And unfortunately, there were several moments in this movie that despite the fast-paced nature of it, you felt like there was pacing issues and that it was dragging on a bit. They definitely could have cut out at least 20 minutes of this movie, to the point where I honestly don't know if this movie or Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is better, but there is an argument to be made that this is the worst Indiana Jones movie, which kind of crushes me a little bit because I was hoping for better. So unfortunately, I have to give rewatchability a 50-50. With all these areas considered, I have to give Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny a 6 out of 10. This movie had some really entertaining action sequences, a couple callbacks to the older movies that worked, and a really strong final scene. But this movie was absolutely riddled with bad CGI, a really messy and terrible script, the character of Helena overshadowing Indiana Jones instead of complimenting him, and a bunch of extra fluff in places that it really should have had depth. So with all that being said, if you're a diehard fan of the Indiana Jones franchise, or if you're looking for a decent action adventure movie with some fast-paced action sequences, you might want to go check out Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny in theaters. Thank you so much for watching. If you've seen Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. As always, I appreciate your love and support, and I'll catch you guys and gals in the next one.